This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. We are floating around in the river right now, so if you're watching this, you're going to have to deal with it. So we got Nick Minesinger here, our guide for the day, and returning, we got Jay Smith. We are actually fly fishing out here, so we'll get started. Nick, where are we at? What are we doing? What are we fly fishing for? Let the great people of America know.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul. Today we're on a Michigan river, fly fishing for some smallmouth bass. It's late July. We got pretty low water, so we're fishing pretty subtle today, and we're doing pretty well at the moment. So yeah.
And so you kind of have a background in, you grew up fishing, correct? From what I've understood. So where did you get your start in fly fishing, and why do you love smallmouth bass so much? You seem to be very passionate about smallmouth.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio. Grew up doing a lot of like fishing for largemouth and like farm ponds and stuff like that. And kind of as I got older, started fishing for some smallmouth and kind of immediately realized like, wow, they pull a lot harder. That was kind of like the first thing I realized. And so like right off the bat, I was kind of hooked on that. Started messing around in rivers quite a bit and kind of fell in love with the river environment. Just kind of the idea of like targets and kind of like a constantly changing environment was really intriguing to me. In terms of like my start in fly fishing, when I left school, I got a job at a small raft company. And that's kind of how I like originally got started within the industry. Eventually decided I kind of wanted to start guiding. Went up to Alaska, worked up there as a guide. Did some guiding for trout in North Carolina, but always kind of watched Schultz Outfitters up here in Michigan and kind of considered them like the upper echelon for like kind of a dream gig. Just smallmouth on the fly. There's just something about it. So past couple years I've been up here with Schultz, and I pretty much split my time doing like some content creation stuff for them and taking people fishing. So it's a pretty good time.
Yeah, so if people follow Schultz, you're the guy posting all that awesome stuff?
Yep, that's me.
Cool. So how long have you and Jay been fishing together? I guess we can ask Jay this question if you want to pass the mic back. We're doing a little on the river style today.
Yeah, so I think, Nick, this is the third time we went out, right, over the last, really over a year. And, you know, I think that you kind of touched on it, but maybe you could go into a little bit more detail on why Schultz is really the premier smallmouth on the fly company really in North America.
Yeah, so Schultz Outfitters as a whole, which is who I work for, I personally take no credit for what I'm about to say because I'm pretty new to Schultz in the scheme of things. But Mike, my boss, has definitely kind of developed a lot of techniques and a lot of flies for chasing these fish in these Michigan rivers. Just kind of the way that he has opened up the ability to even, say, have an outfitter that exclusively focuses on smallmouth bass in rivers is a pretty special thing. Mike has just kind of dedicated his entire life basically to how to catch these fish on the fly and specifically really big ones. So I've always kind of looked up to him as kind of like the best of the best. So
I actually have only caught my first smallmouth this year, and I did it by kayaking a mile out into Lake Erie. They have a bunch of those little islands out there. And the moment I hooked in, I just knew it was a smallmouth from what I've read about how they fight so hard. And it was a good smallmouth. Like I'm screwed in the fact that my first smallmouth ever was a good smallmouth. And the river fishing is a lot different. Fly fishing for them is a lot different. What is some of the key stuff to look for if like someone's going out on their own? I know I don't go out with guides a ton, but I do like to learn and fish to catch fish on my own. So what are some of the things if someone like me, they go out on a guide trip once and now I want to keep catching them on the fly? What is something to keep your eye out for when you're like either wading or floating down the river? Smallmouth habitat, I guess, in general.
Yeah. So something about fishing for smallmouth that I personally find really interesting is that throughout the course of our season, which typically runs from like March to October, the way that we target these fish changes drastically. So kind of like a long way to answer your question, it changes as the season changes. So when we start fishing these fish and our season kind of begins, we're talking about water temps in like the mid to maybe high 30s, really cold stuff. At that point in the year, those fish are going to be sitting in like a lot of the more pillowy water. Obviously, it's really cold. They don't, just like you and I, they don't want to work super hard. So they're going to be sitting in a little bit less heavy current and kind of stacked up on structure and whatnot. The one thing that's the same throughout the course of the season is that smallmouth really like structure. So any wood, any rocks, grass, anything like that, definitely keep an eye on that. At this point of the year, kind of like this like late summer deal, where a smallmouth can be in these rivers is extremely diverse. So obviously there's spots that are kind of confident spots and stuff like that, but I mean, you guys have even seen it today, like a lot of mid-river cruising fish hunting. I mean, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but the boat's covered in damselflies right now. So as the season kind of progresses, those fish kind of go from like crushing bait fish and stuff to like kind of a lot more subtle kind of hunting damsels and hunting smaller little pods of bait and stuff like that. So this time of year, really bass can be just about anywhere in terms of like mid-river. And especially like the main difference too between smallmouth and largemouth is smallmouth are very current dependent creatures. So definitely like moving water versus like kind of like backwater sort of swampy stuff is where you're going to find most of your smallmouth bass.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Nick, obviously, I think that we have a greater appreciation for smallmouth on the fly compared to other people. But fly fishing is most regularly associated with the trout species family. And if you could go into, and I think you've touched on it a little bit, I want you to go into a little bit more detail on why smallies are such a great alternative to trout, why they're fun to catch. I mean, Paul knows, I know, because honestly, sometimes I like catching a smallie better than a trout. But for folks that may be a little trout friendly, how do we make them a little smallie friendly?
Yeah, so good question, Jay. I love trout fishing. I do it quite a bit. I would say something that a lot of people kind of overlook with smallmouth fishing but seem to focus extremely heavily on with trout is, you always hear these conversations about wild trout, native range of trout, which is super cool, but people seem to gloss over that same kind of conversation for bass. So it's like this river, these bass are supposed to be here. They're built to be in this situation. So that on one part is really interesting to me. Like, they're where they should be. They haven't been stocked in here. Obviously, Michigan has amazing trout fishing, but as you kind of like look south, a lot of these kind of like economies built around tourism and stuff are built around the idea of stocking trout, which, definitely not a bad thing, but I would personally rather be focusing on fish that are where they should be. Beyond that, smallmouth are going to fight a lot harder than trout, especially like pound for pound. They're going to absolutely whoop a trout's ass, to put it kindly. And then from a fishing standpoint, kind of like I was saying with the diversity of options on how to fish for them, if you're a dry fly trout fisherman, but you're not in trout country, go dry fly fish for smallmouth. They will eat bugs the exact same way. They will hunt them the exact same way. They will sip them as gingerly as, the most wild, mountain cutthroat that you can find. So in terms of like being able to fish for them how you want, that's something I think is really cool about smallmouth. But yeah, I mean, they're just supposed to be here. They're prehistoric. They're a super cool fish. And I think they demand a lot of respect for that reason.
So I'm going to follow up that question with why Ypsilanti? I mean, for folks who may not know where Ypsilanti, Michigan is, it's not known for its culture. It's between Ann Arbor, Detroit, Flint, and Toledo. I feel like that's a relatively reasonable diamond more than a triangle. But I mean, with Paul and I coming up from Toledo, you look at Ypsilanti, it's kind of, for all intents and purposes, an armpit town. But, what you guys have done, particularly where the location of the shop is, can you kind of highlight why that's important, not just for the city of Ypsilanti, but for the culture that you guys create as bass fly fishermen?
Yeah, so this area as a whole, like Michigan as a whole, is what I think is honestly like the angler capital of the country. And by that, I mean, like, you know, if you throw a rock in Michigan, you're going to find an angler, and oftentimes you're going to find extremely diverse and extremely talented anglers because of the way that our fishery is set up. So, you know, most of our anglers, they're not just bass fishermen, they're probably steelhead fishermen, they're probably ice fishermen. So culturally, Michigan has like just a super strong fishing background. In terms of why Ypsilanti, that's mostly due to the fact that that's where our owner is from, basically. He's from pretty much the area and found a spot to have the shop in Ypsilanti there. So that's kind of why our shop is in Ypsilanti. But it works out really well for us because kind of within that triangle that you were talking about, we have roughly 7-8 rivers that we guide, that we have the opportunity and a ton of floats on each of those rivers within driving distance. Obviously, it's really nice to be with close distance to the hub of like Detroit and Ann Arbor in terms of population for clientele and whatnot like that. But there's definitely no real thought put behind like why we're actually in Ypsilanti. That kind of just happened. But it puts us in a nice triangle of being able to be within striking distance of a lot of good rivers, and like you guys being from Toledo, you guys can make a day trip up here, and it's not too crazy. So it's a nice central location for us.
Yeah, and it really is not that far. It was like we're not in Ypsilanti right now, but it was like an hour 40 minutes, which in the Midwest is just a decent drive. It's a half hour to work. So what's double, triple that? You're in good fishing water. And something we talked about earlier, I think that kind of hit chord with me, and this isn't just me talking on my ass and like making shit up. We were talking about how fishing up here in the Midwest can be kind of tough, not only because, like we talked a little bit earlier about how bass aren't as easy to catch as everybody thinks they are, especially bigger bass. I mean, we were probably, I think we caught 15 fish today is what we said? 16? So we've caught quite a few fish today, and but you go other places around the country that have like really well stocked and managed fisheries that are specific for very huge bass. They have a longer growing season. Like I was talking earlier about how when I go down to Texas, I can just crush fish because I spend a lot of time up here not catching fish and got to make it count. So why do you think that? I mean, I feel like the Midwest is a good training ground to catch fish because it's a little more challenging. Obviously, I'm not like a fucking pro fisherman or anything, but like you've fished in Alaska, you fished in a lot more places than me. So like, how do you feel like that stacks up? Is that like bullshit, or do you think that that's accurate? And I don't know, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely work for our fish. I think we have super vibrant fisheries in the sense that like we can come out and there's definitely no like skill requirement in a sense to like come out and fish with us. We take a ton of beginners and stuff like that. So in terms of like being able to find fish, it's it's definitely possible. It's more of like those really large bass in a river system are typically really old. Typically, like a trophy-sized bass in these rivers can be, over 15 years old. So that's a lot of time spent in these rivers in the present moment, watching their surroundings and stuff, and really getting educated on what's real and what's fake. So in terms of catching a real trophy bass, like, yeah, you can luck into them, obviously, but for the most part, like a lot of it is really, really a lot of time is put in behind the vise, behind the oars. And for the angler behind the rod rather, kind of like preparing for those moments. In terms of the Midwest, like I said earlier, I think that like there's just a level of hardcore anglers in the Midwest that doesn't really seem to exist everywhere, at least from what I've seen. And like, especially in the sense of, battling elements. So whether it's early season smallmouth fishing where it's snowing and it's sleeting and everything like that, or it's steelhead fishing or whatever, it's like Michigan boys don't seem to be too averse to weather situations. And I think that, that puts a little hair on your chest and makes you willing to chase fish, the way you want to. So I think that's something that's pretty cool about the Midwest.
You kind of touched on it just a second ago, Nick. Kind of go into a little detail for the folks listening about your preparation as a guide, because, this isn't like, oh, Mike said go on this river and you'll catch fish. Kind of go through what you have to do to prepare in the off season. I know you talked about being on the vise and tying flies, but your preparation to take clients on any river.
Yeah, so, a lot of that work in terms of kind of like, getting everyone squared away to be in positions for success is done by our head guide, James Hughes. So it's kind of James's job to kind of like look at all the situations, get in touch with all the guides, and make sure everyone's set up for a day of success. But in terms of like preparation, like, yesterday we got hammered with a pretty good rainstorm coming through, which kind of changed, certain options, and certain rivers and certain stretches were kind of blown out. So, when something like that happens, there's a pretty good chunk of time spent, like, looking at gauges on these rivers and talking with other guides and seeing what they're seeing and what they saw yesterday and what they're doing tomorrow. And just a lot of communication from the whole team, basically kind of deciding like, okay, you have an angler you've fished a lot. I have a beginner that's brand new. You have da-da-da-da, and kind of just working through, all of those and kind of deciding where everyone would be the most successful. In terms of tying flies, Russ Madden, probably my favorite fly tyer, is quoted as saying, the best fly in the day is the one you tied the night before. And I really think that for me, that seems to be really true. And I don't know if it's just because I'm lazy and don't want to like fill fly boxes, but like when I have a trip and I kind of have an idea of what we're going to be doing and what that clarity is going to look like and stuff, there's typically the night before a couple bugs tied kind of specifically for that day, which is what we're doing today, and finding some success on the bugs we tied last night. So that's definitely part of it, just kind of looking at variables, temperature, rain, what those flows are going to look like and what the fish have kind of been doing.
Hey, what's up everyone? James Appleton here, co-founder of Absolute Aid. Welcome to the Seek to Do More program. This program will help you help yourself by developing the daily habits that will elevate your entire life. Over the next 30 days, you'll complete the doers list every single day. And the doers list includes 1, do something physical. 2, follow and stick to your diet of choice. 3, read a real book. 4, further your education on purpose. 5, dedicate time to your spiritual life. And 6, dedicate time to your hobbies. So if you're ready to take a structured, proven approach to build the daily habits that will allow you to get the most out of yourself, your time, and your life every single day, the Seek to Do More program is your blueprint. So make a choice, commit to yourself, sign up below, and let's get started.
So we're out here, we're strictly fly fishing. You've got different rods rigged up with different line, different setups. What's your typical setup for someone who would like to get, if they live out here in the Midwest, they want to try fly fishing for smallmouth? What's like your stereotypical setup that you can recommend? You don't have to go brand by brand or anything, but like what are they looking for if they want to go catch smallmouth fly fishing specifically?
Yeah, so we pretty much run between 6 and 8 weights on our boats. Typically, like early season, really big flies. Water's a little bit dirtier. That's when we're going to be throwing 8 weights and stuff like that. Today, we're kind of splitting between 6s and 7s. If you're a weight angler and you're kind of just getting into fishing, we might slide into your tripod there. If you're a weight angler and you're kind of just getting into fishing, I would say for the most part, a good way to go about it, you're most likely, if you're a weight angler and you're just getting into it, you're probably going to be fishing mostly in the summer when it's warm out and you're walking around these rivers. I'd say a 6 weight with a floating line would be like a really good start. Or you got a little bit of beef that you can throw a little bit of size. If you're really interested in throwing like bigger streamers, stepping up to like a 7 or 8 would probably be a good place to go. But a 6 would give you the ability to step down to smaller stuff, do some trout fishing if you went on vacation or something like that. But I mean, we're throwing 3 to 4 inch flies today and some poppers and stuff on 6 weights and doing just fine. So
for specific, I guess we'll talk specifics, flies. Are there any patterns? I know we've gone over a few today. We probably switched flies like 3-4 times. But are there any patterns that are more attractive to smallmouth than others? Like just generically something you want to throw to get started.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, today we have some low water and we have high temperatures, high sun, so we're throwing relatively small flies for kind of what Schultz is known for throwing. So today we're throwing like woolly bugger variants, basically. So basically fancy woolly buggers. Like I said, like roughly 3 to 4 inches long, some marabou, some rubber legs, some hackle, a few other little secrets thrown in there, but for the most part, just a woolly bugger. I feel like everyone kind of starts with a woolly bugger, and then as you kind of like advance through fly fishing, you kind of want to throw fancier stuff and get a little bit crazier with it. The truth is, like, especially if you tie, you can take a woolly bugger and go a really long way with it. So woolly buggers, to me, I mean, if you just wanted to catch fish, I mean, it'll literally catch anything that swims. So to me, a woolly bugger is about as versatile as a fly is going to get.
And we did talk a little bit earlier about how it's really useful to understand how fish operate and how to catch fish and what you need to do. If you want to be successful long term in the long run, you need to kind of, I don't know, learn the basics before you get too crazy with it. I'm personally in the camp of the tools don't matter as long as you understand how fish act. I'm in that camp. So like, would you agree? And I love spin fishing as much as I love fly fishing. Like I'm pretty much at this point addicted to both. Like if I can get a rod in my hand, I'm happy. It's just a new avenue fly fishing is for me. But like, I think the important thing is understanding, like looking at a spot being like, there's probably fish there. The important thing. So like, how do you go about learning that for someone new? Because when I started, I didn't really have much like background in fishing. We were just throwing topwater lures all the time. And I didn't know about the rest of fishing, like soft plastics, crankbaits. I had no concept of any of that. So how do you go about learning how to catch fish as a beginner? Because that's always like the toughest part I think people have, because it's overwhelming. There's so much shit on TV and YouTube and Instagram. It's like, what works, you know? So I think that's the problem people have. So I don't know if you have any insight on that, but that's always where my mind goes to, because for the longest time I was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, so, you know, there's stages to everything. And before I forget, I do want to say, we were kind of talking about it earlier, like personally, I would kind of rather be like an angler than a fly fisherman, if that makes sense. So like I have no qualms against throwing spinning gear. I have a spinning rod in the boat today. At the shop there in Ypsi, we have a full room dedicated to conventional tackle, and all of us are very much willing to go back and forth between the spin and the fly. And honestly, when it comes to river bass, I think that there is some validity to the idea of getting a spinning rod and messing around, throwing around a spinning rod to kind of feed your fly fishing knowledge. And by that, I mean, you know, if you take a Ned rig or a fluke or something simple and you walk around these rivers just like poking around, you're going to be able to cast further and more comfortably than if you just started fly fishing. And so as a result, you're going to be able to catch some more fish and kind of like learn where they're holding and stuff. And I think, you know, in the fly world, there seems to be a lot of kind of, you know, fly or die kind of mentality, where I think in reality, the best anglers I know have like fully interchange, basically like using between the two. So that's one piece of advice I would give in terms of learning how to fish. In terms of the mechanics of fly fishing, I really think that everyone should start on a pond fishing for bluegill. They are extremely willing to a fly. For their size, they pull pretty damn hard, and that'll just teach you all the mechanics. It'll teach you how to cast, you know, how to cast at a specific target and kind of get your accuracy up. It'll teach you hook sets. It'll teach you how to fight fish. So if someone literally just bought a fly rod and kind of wanted to get dialed in, I would send them like a bluegill pond and be like, just practice your hook set and everything like that. Because as Jay knows, the hook set on bass, you know, you got to be on them. You got to do the work. They're not going to always hook themselves. Occasionally, you'll get a fish that just absolutely demolishes it and gets both hooks. But a lot of the times, you know, you're really engaged with your fly, kind of tracking how it's swimming. And when the lights go out at the end of that line, you as the angler have to make the play there. In terms of finding fish in a river, I think there's, you know, one of the easiest ways to go about catching smallmouth is just go swing like a woolly bugger through a riffle or something like that. You know, if you're wading around your local river, you know, go give that a shot. You'll probably get some yanks. In terms of finding big fish, honestly, you know, in today's era of kind of like instant gratification, it's probably not the answer people want to hear, but like it really is just about putting, you know, quarters in the slot. And something I've found in the past couple of years that has really been important for me, is just doing a lot of watching more than fishing at times. Like if you really want to get into like head hunting, I think, you know, if you have the ability to be on a boat or be on a kayak or something like that, just make sure you keep your eyes downstream and make sure you're just, you know, looking at, you know, possible spots, but also spots that, you know, you might not expect, like mid-river stuff, and just kind of start taking like a mental, you know, checklist of like, okay, I saw one there today. Next time you come in, was he there today? Oh, he was. Okay, he lives there. And then from there, you can kind of start, you know, building on that and kind of start looking for giants.
So, Jay, as far as I know, you started fly fishing. I don't know if you fished traditionally before. So you have a completely different perspective on that as far as I know. So what's your thoughts on this whole start with spin fishing thing? Because it seems to have created some controversy on the internet.
You know, this is the best part is that I openly told you I need to be more controversial. I don't know if I can do it. That's the problem, because you're asking me about something that's my experience when it could be different for every person. So my entry into fly fishing is completely different than most people. You know, it was a mental getaway from some of the stressors at work. So I don't think that's fair to spin fishermen. And I don't think there's a wrong way to do it as long as you do it. You fully commit, you take the time to learn. You know, for me, one of the biggest things was I learned how to cast first and cast well before I learned how to fish, because there is such a big difference in fly casting compared to fly fishing. And, you know, as a former athlete, like the mechanics of fly fishing are very important to me. And then the rest keeps dialing down to strategy and thought process and how to catch fish, because that's why this is such a beautiful sport, because no matter what you do, everything can change on a daily basis. And being prepared for whatever the conditions or the fish may bring you, whatever time of year it is, you know, I think that's very important. And that's why I keep doing it. I have nothing against spin anglers, conventional anglers whatsoever. I think especially for my kids, getting them out on the water is the most important thing, and how they do it, honestly, I don't care.
Fair enough. Yeah, I just like to fish. I just like to get out on the water, and if I'm getting a fish, or even if I'm just hanging out and having a good time, that's what's most important to me. And at the end of the day, I think people take this shit way too seriously sometimes. It's like, it's not, you're not getting paid to fish. Like, you're getting paid a little bit to fish sometimes, but like, you're getting paid to take people fishing, but like the average dude is not getting paid to fish. So I don't know why they take it so seriously. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a way to like get away and try. It's just a skill, you know, it's a fun skill to have. Jay and I were talking about this in the car ride. Like, golf is like, whatever. It's cool. A lot of doctors golf, but like, with fishing, you're like learning a very specific skill set, and it's like, I don't know, it's you versus something, whereas golf, you're just hitting a ball. Like, I feel like there's an end goal to this, and you're like man versus nature kind of deal. It's like very primal, and I think it's like a good skill set to have, because you're actually like actively pursuing something that has just as much of a chance of getting away as you do of catching it, and I think that's really fun. It's like a big game of cat and mouse, but it's human and fish. So I don't know, we're getting off track here, but if people like, I will say I've had quite a few guides. You're really laid back and chill and fun. I've had guides who have not been laid back or chill or fun. So I appreciate that being out here, because like I've been yelled at before, been, you know, screamed at by guides, and you're just like, dude, come on. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. That's why I hired you. So I appreciate that. So if you guys want to fish, definitely come out here with Nick. We've been having fun all day. We've probably been out here, 4 hours, 3 hours? I'm not sure. Caught a ton of fish. So where can people hire you? How can they get a hold of you specifically, get you out on the water, catch some smallmouth?
Yeah, you could call Schultz Outfitters. You could look that up on Google or whatever. And yeah, if you just give them a call and ask to come fishing with me, we'll get you on the water. I do think that, like you said about kind of like taking it serious, there are times to take it serious, and there are times to kind of be chilled about it. I think something that I find that a lot of people seem to, you know, like these days and sort of resonate with is like, you know, we have been out here and we're going to be out here for, you know, the whole day or whatever, but we're not on our phones at all. And I think that's something that like I hear a lot of clients just talk about. Like, it's just nice to get a break from the phone. And to me, I think that's a really cool part of what we get to do out here, is just sort of like unplug and just like, you know, notice the little things, the green herons, the muskrats, the little balls of bait. I think, you know, that kind of stuff is, to me, as much of a part of the experience as the fishing itself. So, but yeah, Schultz Outfitters, Nick Minesinger. I think it's just Nick Minesinger on Instagram too. But yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you guys coming out and fishing.
Always, brother.
Now, what do you say we go catch one of those trophy smallmouth?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.